All right, this is section 2, research methods. Our learning objectives are to differentiate between 4 kinds of research methods: surveys, field research, experiments, and secondary data analysis, and understand why different topics are better suited to different research approaches. Sociologists examine the world, see a problem or an interesting pattern, and set out to study it. They use research methods to design a study, perhaps a detailed systematic scientific method for conducting research and obtaining data, or perhaps an ethnographic study, utilizing an interpretive framework. Planning the research design is a key step in any sociological study. The Hawthorne effect, people changing their behavior because they know they are being watched as part of a study, is unavoidable in some research. In many cases, sociologists just have to make the purpose of the study known. Subjects must be aware that they are being observed, and a certain amount of artificiality may result. In planning a study's design, sociologists generally choose from 4 widely used methods of social investigation: survey, field research, experiment, and secondary data analysis, or use of existing sources. Every research method comes with pluses and minuses, and the topic of study strongly influences which method or methods are put to use. And questionnaires are a common research method. The U.S. Census is a well-known example. So the first one we'll look at is surveys. The survey collects data from subjects who respond to a series of questions about behaviors and opinions, often in the form of a questionnaire. The survey is one of the most widely used scientific research methods. A survey targets a specific population, people who are the focus of a study. Most researchers choose to survey a small sector of the population, or a sample, that is, a manageable number of subjects who represent a larger population. The success of a study depends on how well a population is represented by the sample. In a random sample, every person in a population has the same chances of being chosen for the study. According to the laws of probability, random samples represent the population as a whole. And you can get 2 different kinds of data doing a survey: quantitative data or qualitative data. Quantitative data, research collected in numerical form that can be counted, is easy to tabulate, while qualitative data, results that are subjective and often based on what is seen in the natural setting, is harder to organize and tabulate. An interview is a one-on-one conversation between the researcher and the subject and is a way of conducting surveys on a topic. As part of a malaria pill study, U.S. Navy hospital personnel complete a questionnaire on health issues they experienced in Somalia. Participants submitted a blood sample as part of this study, which supported Operation Restore Hope. The second one we'll do is field research. Sociological researchers travel across countries and cultures to interact with and observe subjects in their natural environments. Field research refers to gathering primary data from a natural environment without doing a lab experiment or a survey. It is a research method suited to an interpretive framework rather than to the scientific method. While field research often begins in a specific setting, the study's purpose is to observe specific behaviors in that setting. Fieldwork is optimal for observing how people behave. It is less useful, however, for understanding why they behave that way. You can't really narrow down cause and effect when there are so many variables floating around in a natural environment. Much of the data gathered in field research are based not on cause and effect, but on correlation. And while field research looks for correlation, its small sample size does not allow for establishing a causal relationship between 2 variables. So if you remember from psychology, correlation and causation are not the same thing. You look at the picture, business suits for a day job are replaced by Lay's and t-shirts for a Jimmy Buffett concert. And that goes along with the Making Connections Sociology in the Real World block. Parrot heads as sociological subjects. Jimmy Buffett, an American musician who built a career from his single top 10 song Margaritaville, has a following of devoted groupies called parrot heads. Some of them have taken fandom to the extreme, making parrot head culture a lifestyle. At Jimmy Buffett concerts, parrot heads engage in a form of role play. They paint their faces and dress for the tropics in grass skirts, Hawaiian leis, and parrot hats. These fans don't generally play the part of parrot heads outside of these concerts. You're not likely to see a lone parrot head in a bank or library. In that sense, parrot head culture is less about individualism and more about conformity. Being a parrot head means sharing a specific identity. Parrot heads feel connected to each other. It's a group identity and not an individual one. In conducting studies about pockets of culture, most sociologists seek to discover a universal appeal. Mihalik and Papineau studied the parrot heads and stated, although parrot heads are a relative minority of the contemporary U.S. population, an in-depth look at their practice and conditions illuminate cultural practices and conditions many of us experience and participate in. There are three types of field research. The first one is participant observation, in which researchers join people and participate in a group's routine activities for the purpose of observing them within that context. This method lets researchers experience a specific aspect of social life. And in the picture, is she working as a waitress or a sociologist conducting a study using participant observation? Field researchers simply want to observe and learn. As patterns emerge, questions will become more specific, observations will lead to hypotheses, and hypotheses will guide the researcher in shaping data into results. Field research happens in real locations. What type of environments do workspaces foster? What would a sociologist discover after blending in? The second method of field research is ethnography, the extended observation of the social perspective and cultural values of an entire social setting. Ethnographies involve objective observation of an entire community. A classroom in Muncie, Indiana in 1917, 5 years between John and Helen Lind began researching this typical American community, and this is part of an ethnography. This is the next Making Connections box, Sociological Research, The Making of Middletown, a study of modern American culture. In 1924, a young married couple named Robert and Helen Lind undertook an unprecedented ethnography to apply sociological methods to the study of one U.S. city in order to discover what ordinary Americans did and believed. Choosing Muncie, Indiana, population about 30,000, as their subject, they moved to the small town and lived there for 18 months. The Linds focused their study on the impact of industrialization and urbanization. They observed that Muncie was divided into business class and working class groups. The two classes led different lives with different goals and hopes. However, the Linds observed mass production offered both classes the same amenities. Like wealthy families, the working class were now able to own radios, cars, washing machines, telephones, vacuum cleaners, and refrigerators. This was an emerging material new reality of the 1920s. Readers in the 1920s and 30s identified with these citizens of Muncie, Indiana, but they were equally fascinated by the sociological methods and the use of scientific data to define ordinary Americans. The book was proof that social data was important and interesting to the American public. The third method is a case study, and this is an in-depth analysis of a single event, situation, or individual. To conduct a case study, a researcher examines existing sources like documents and archival records, conducts interviews, engages in direct observation, and even participant observation if possible. It's difficult to make universal claims based on just one person, since one person does not verify a pattern. This is why most sociologists do not use case studies as a primary research method. The next research method we'll look at are experiments. Sociologist Frances Husenstam conducted an experiment to explore the correlation between traffic stops and race-based bumper stickers. This issue of racial profiling remains a hot-button topic today. One way researchers test social theories is by conducting an experiment, meaning they investigate relationships to test a hypothesis, a scientific approach. Lab-based experiments and natural or field experiments are two methods that you can do for experiments. As a research method, either type of sociological experiment is useful for testing if-then statements. If a particular thing happens, then another particular thing will result. And here's your third making connections, an experiment in action. 1971, Frances Husenstam, a sociology professor at California State University at Los Angeles, had a theory about police prejudice. To test her theory, she conducted an experiment. She chose 15 students from 3 ethnic backgrounds, Black, white, and Hispanic. She chose students who routinely drove to and from campus along Los Angeles freeway routes and who'd had perfect driving records for longer than a year. Those were her independent variables: students, good driving records, same commute route. Next, she placed a Black Panther bumper sticker on each car. That sticker, a representation of a social value, was the independent variable. In the 1970s, the Black Panthers were a revolutionary group actively fighting racism. Husenstam asked the students to follow their normal driving patterns. She wanted to see if seeming support of the Black Panthers would change how these good drivers were treated by the police patrolling the highways. The first arrest for an incorrect lane change was made 2 hours after the experiment began. One participant was pulled over 3 times in 3 days. He quit the study. After 17 days, 15 drivers had collected a total of 33 traffic citations. The experiment was halted. The funding to pay traffic fines had run out, and so had the enthusiasm of the participants. Secondary data analysis. Secondary data doesn't result from first-hand research collected from primary sources, but are the already completed works of other researchers. Sociologists might study works written by historians, economists, teachers, or early sociologists. They might search through periodicals, newspapers, or magazines from any period in history. One of the advantages of secondary data is that it is non-reactive or unobtrusive research, meaning that it does not include direct contact with subjects and will not alter or influence people's behavior. To guide the search through a vast library of materials and avoid wasting time reading unrelated sources, sociologists employ content analysis, applying a systematic approach to record and value information gleaned from secondary data as they relate to the study at hand. And this one was a little bit longer, but here is our section summary. Sociological research is a fairly complex process. As you can see, a lot goes into even a simple research design. There are many steps and much to consider when collecting data on human behavior, as well as interpreting and analyzing data in order to form conclusive results. Sociologists use scientific methods for good reason. The scientific method provides a system of organization that helps researchers plan and conduct the study while ensuring that data and results are reliable, valid, and objective. The many methods available to researchers, including experiments, surveys, field studies, and secondary data analysis, all come with advantages and disadvantages. The strength of a study can depend on the choice and implementation of the appropriate method of gathering research. Depending on the topic, a study might use a single method or a combination of methods. It is important to plan a research design before undertaking a study. The information gathered may in itself be surprising, and the study design should provide a solid framework in which to analyze predicted and unpredicted data. And test yourself. Which materials are considered secondary data? What methods did researchers John Millick and John Papineau use to study parrot heads? Why is choosing a random sample an effective way to select participants? What research method did John S. Lind and Helen Merrill Lind mainly use in their Middleton study? Which research approach is best suited to the scientific method? The main difference between ethnography and other types of participant observation is? Which best describes the results of a case study? And using secondary data is considered an unobtrusive or blank research method. To look more in depth at those questions and for answers, look at the end of Chapter 2 in your textbook. And that is it for Section 2.